National recruiting analyst Hayes Fawcett said this week that Texas and Miami are two schools I would not want to recruit against right now. So what happens next?
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Shout out to the everydayers, and thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Going to be joined by the recruiting overlord here in just a second. And every time Brian Smith joins us, he's brought to you by LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions apply. Yes, we have the recruiting overlord with us, Brian Smith. So, Brian, Miami, of course, the last two recruiting cycles has been able to put together top 10 classes, even a top 5 class, despite not winning a whole lot on the field, right? Miami looks better on the field so far this season. If the results are there, the recruits are going to be there. And I want to start with 5-star defensive line standout Elijah Griffin, who had an official visit to Miami over the summer. He's going to be back at Miami this weekend. He wants to take in the game day experience. He's coming to the Ball State game. Elijah Griffin, his top 3 has been down to Georgia, Miami, and USC. Do you still look at Georgia as the big-time favorite there? And what's it going to take for Miami to gain some ground?
Until otherwise proven, I'll pick Georgia, but he keeps visiting Miami and communicating with them. And I don't know his involvement with SC. That one's a little more peculiar, but Miami's done this with several kids where they hung around and then they ended up getting them in the last couple classes. So if you're Georgia, that's probably the school you should be most wary of. I'm not buying all the USC hype with the Southern kids. I don't think they'll get many of them. They're trying very, very desperately, but I still don't see it. Miami's winning too. So this is a different sell for an elite kid than it would have been just 1 year ago. I think Miami has a better shot now than what they did because of how they started out. They've been talked about a lot. They're the media darling. Can't hurt.
Yeah, it certainly can't. And speaking of like Miami winning, and this doesn't necessarily apply to Elijah Griffin, but with Miami winning and then the other big 2 schools in the state not having a great start to the year. I mean, Florida did bounce back with a win against Samford, but Miami crushed Florida week 1. Florida State is 0-2 heading into their game against Memphis. Like, how big of a boost is that as well, in a general sense, Brian, knowing Miami competes with Florida and Florida State for so many players? And we've already been seeing over the past week, Florida State has been hemorrhaging commits.
I think that today's era is really wild. 10 years ago, if you had a bad season, it would impact the next recruiting class, not very much with the current. Now it's like instantaneous. Florida State lost a kid right after the Texas game when he committed to Texas. The next day, another kid decommitted. And you know what I mean? Like, it's just Florida State lost on the off week. So, yeah. I mean, that's hard to do. Florida, there's been a lot of stuff around Billy for a long time. So that's been like a slow death crawl. And then Miami bouncing them inside Ben Hill Griffin Stadium probably didn't help their recruiting efforts very much, especially because the 2 schools go against each other for so many in-state recruits and a few out-of-state too. So, yeah, Miami sits in a very prosperous position at the current moment.
Well, the very top recruit in state in the class of 2025. And by the way, we are going to talk about some 2026s on this episode because Miami has got irons in the fire for some of the very best in that class. We're going to talk more about Miami pushing for 5-star players. We're going to talk about who is Miami's toughest opponent on the rest of the schedule this year. But Brian, the very best player in the state of Florida for the class of 2025 is DJ Pickett. Yes. DJ, who during the summer, he committed to LSU. I know he's got a very strong relationship with Corey Raymond on the LSU staff, which is why I'm not saying automatic flip or anything like that. But Miami has ties to DJ, ties to his family. Obviously, Miami is closer to the Tampa area than Baton Rouge, easier for he and his family to get to. Miami is chipping away with this one, Brian. DJ Pickett took in both of Miami's first 2 games to start the year. He was at the Florida game. Obviously, he liked what he saw from Miami, probably not so much for Florida. He was at the FAMU game. He and his father are looking to come back for the Florida State game later on this season. Do you think Miami is putting themselves in a good position to possibly pull off a flip with DJ Pickett?
I think what LSU does is more important than anything, but Miami has to do its due diligence as well. LSU's still not very good on defense. That's not any shock. Keep an eye on that. But Miami's improved. You got OJ's playing early. That helps. You got a freshman that's played some, and the defense overall is just much better, I think, as a unit, all three levels. So DJ's getting to see a different kind of team. That's not going to hurt. I've known him since he was like 8th grade. He's a guy that's uber competitive. Doesn't say a lot, but he's very, very competitive. He's not going to go somewhere he doesn't think they're going to win. He's just not that guy. So Miami getting him on campus, and the dad wants to go back for the Florida State game. I think there's a chance that Miami could pull the flip. And going into the year, he committed LSU. I said, let's see, it'll still be a signing day deal. I think Miami's closed the gap just because of how they played. It's no different than with Elijah. You got something to see here. Like, everybody wants to win. I don't think Miami's in his bad spot. I would assume they're at least number 2 on his list.
Now, another top class of 2025 player who just visited the Hurricanes this past weekend, he attended the Florida A&M game, and it's another player committed elsewhere, Brian. 4-star linebacker Tarvos TJ Alford, tremendous player out of Vero Beach. He's verbally committed to Ohio State. Now, the last couple of cycles, Miami and Ohio State have had some battles, Brian, and this could be, another one. Miami has flipped players from Ohio State in the past. Jordan Lyle, Mark Fletcher, Justin Scott. Ohio State, of course, won the big battle for Jeremiah Smith, who's already playing so well with the Buckeyes. But now Miami is maybe looking to flip another one from Ohio State. What's the latest on TJ Alford?
TJ's trying to say that he's in the bag for Ohio State, but he's taking visits, and Miami's now on the short list. His dad's a Canes fan. He's going to come down, etc. I would not be surprised if he ended up staying in state. At Miami, as we alluded to just a little bit ago, is the best option in state if you want to win, going by the early tea leaves from this season. I think that's a pretty safe assumption. So I'm curious to see how the visits go, because he'll probably come multiple times. It's not that far from Vero down to the Miami area. I imagine that Ohio State's a little nervous about this one, and they should. Florida State's still trying. I'm sure Florida is too, etc. That's a really good football player. Everybody's going to recruit him until signing day. Tarvos Alford is very, very talented.
We're going to talk about more talented players when we come back, because Miami actually this week has received on-3 predictions to land 2 of the better players in the class of 2026. One of those is related to DJ Pickett. So he already has a cousin who's on Miami right now, and Booker Pickett Jr., maybe another cousin who might end up being a Cane. Let's keep pulling the Pickett family closer and closer to the U. And we're going to break it down here with the recruiting overlord. You guys want to keep it locked. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Guys, I already know you're keeping it locked to Ultimate College Football HC. This mobile game and simulation is addictive. I think you guys are going to enjoy it as much as I do. In this amazing game, you get to step into the shoes or the loafers of a head coach and lead your college football program to glory. Can you imagine actually being the head coach of the Miami Hurricanes? From recruiting players and hiring coaching staff to overseeing training camps and handling scholarships, you control every crucial detail of your program. It's all in your hands. Here's what I really love about the game. You're responsible for calling offensive plays during the games. Your strategy will not only determine the success of your football season, it's going to shape the future and legacy of your program. Ultimate College Football HC is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and when you want to. And of course, we have a special offer for you from Locked On Canes. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Make sure to take advantage of this perk, as it's going to get your team off to a strong start. To download the game, just visit ultimate-cfb.com or look it up in the app stores. Ultimate College Football HC. Begin your coaching legacy today. Guys, we're also brought to you by Game Time. If you're looking for the best prices on tickets, especially last minute, guys, go no further than Game Time. They're going to get you in the door at that Ball State game this weekend for prices you cannot believe. And the 1989 team is going to be honored this weekend. Guys, Game Time, it rewards my procrastination, because the closer I get to the event, the better the prices get. It really is a beautiful thing. And they have a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Folks, you can get all-in pricing at Game Time, which means no hidden fees. You see the prices right there up front. Get a panoramic view from your seat before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. It's the only ticket app that I use. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Oh, yeah, it's game time. Thank you for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am Alex Dono. We're joined by the recruiting expert, a.k.a. the overlord of Locked On. Brian Smith is with us. So, Brian, speaking of the Pickett family, Miami received an On3 Sports prediction earlier this week to land 2026 four-star standout offensive lineman Cannon Pickett. And listen, I've got some insight on Cannon because we interviewed his father, Booker Sr., a few months back, and Cannon grew up a Miami fan. Like, he loves the Hurricanes, so he might have that opportunity to fulfill his dream playing in orange and green.
Yeah, I've teased him a few times about it. I know Cannon pretty well. He wants to kind of go through the process, and he should. But Miami's been a school that he has followed throughout his life, and I imagine that them playing well, and especially the offensive line being good, Miraball's obviously one of the best O-line coaches at the college level, certainly helps the Canes. I'm not surprised that he's getting crystal ball because they've been on him for a long time too. It is important at this stage of recruiting for a kid that's a junior. You'd already have a relationship, and Miami does. That really works in their favor. So they did their due diligence. They stayed on him, and his brother's obviously signed to play there for the University of Miami, and he's already playing too. Booker's doing pretty well. So I think Miami has the inside track, and I'm sure he's going to be down there a lot to see his brother. So watch out for the Canes.
So, another offensive lineman that Miami has been recruiting heavily. I don't know if I don't think Miami's received any predictions to land this one yet, but he is a Miami legacy. 2026 offensive lineman Grant Wise, who's the son of Ty Wise, so he's a Miami legacy. And like, Grant Wise, not only a tremendous offensive lineman, this dude's like a powerlifting champion. This guy could probably like lift semi trucks over his head. He's so strong. He's from like the Pensacola area, right? Brian, have you watched him play?
I've seen him, and more importantly, one of my buddies that's a trainer in the area said he's undoubtedly the next guy that's like a lineman from the area to be a dominant player. And he's a kid again. He's a legacy. So it certainly does not hurt. Miami recruits Pensacola, Mobile, the whole state of Alabama, South Georgia, all that pretty hard. This stuff, they've done a great job, and this is a good sign because they used to miss on some of these kids, and it's still state of Florida. You might as well recruit it, and he's a legacy. So they need to get him down to campus. I'm sure he's anxious to do so. He's going to come down for, I forget which game it is, but that's a good start, and he will be a kid that'll be a four-star recruit, almost lock, stock, and barrel.
He's going to be for the Florida State game is when Grant Wise is going to come next.
I knew he was coming sometime.
Yeah. Well, so let's go back to a 2026 player that Miami has received projections to land this week, and that's four-star receiver Jabari Brady out of Monarch, who's got good size at 6'2". This is a player, honestly, we haven't talked about him enough here on Locked On Canes. So I'd like your take, Brian, not only on Jabari Brady's recruitment, like who else is in the mix, and give us your scouting report if you can.
Jabari is a physically imposing kid. He's give or take 200 pounds, and he looks like he's much older and looks like he's not, except you look at the face, you know he's still young. But when I saw him when he was coming out of his freshman year, everybody knew that he was going to be that guy. I went to a workout that he did. He had Miami gloves on and stuff, but he had his shirt off, and he looked like a guy that was 20 years old when he was 15. You know, he was just built. But now he's just got to learn his craft, just route running and stuff like that. But he's got massive hands. He's got really long arms. He's pretty twitchy for a guy his size. It's just fine-tuning his craft. The only thing left as far as recruitment is just all the visits. He's just getting started with that. He's been to Miami numerous times. I'd imagine they're the leader in the clubhouse. He's always kind of followed Miami, but everybody's recruiting him. You can't teach the frame. Everybody wants that big boundary receiver. So Florida State, Florida, everybody's after him. I don't think there's going to be necessarily be any early decision, but if there was, it'd probably be Miami, though.
Mm. Well, another player that a lot of teams are after, including Miami, is top 2026 athlete Derek Cooper out of Chaminade. Now he
Yep.
was just down, Brian, for Miami's victory over Florida A&M, and he really enjoyed it. And hearing him talk about it really made me feel old, because he talked about how, like, hey, so many people in my life were telling me how good Miami used to be, and I'm like, well, I remember those days. But on the bright side, Derek Cooper does see Miami, trending again. He loves what he saw on the field. He thinks Miami, can become a great football team again, and maybe he can become a part of that. He's being recruited heavily by the likes of Ohio State, Texas A&M, Florida State, Florida, Auburn, or some of the programs that are in on Derek Cooper. Where do you think his recruitment is at right now? And also, a guy listed as an athlete, what position do you think he projects out best at?
That's the $1 million question. Running back and linebacker are the two that most people believe he'll end up at. I think he would be better on the defensive side of the ball, but he likes running back just as much, if not more.
Mm,
He's a bigger guy, 200 pounds or so for a kid that's going into his junior year. He'll end up at 225. He could play will linebacker or be a big back, either one. More importantly, his ability to change direction at his size and be a fierce competitor, very physical, is why he can play either side of the football. Derek's a good kid. He's not worried about what anything else is going on around him. He just works his craft, and he's very, very competitive in elite settings. He was at the Future 50 event, stood out at that. It's the top kids down at the Under Armour event at IMG. This is a football player that any school in the country would be lucky to get on either side of the ball. Miami's prioritized him for a long time, though.
yeah, I can see why. Yeah, I want to pick your brain on a player who's already on Miami's roster, but I would imagine you covered him in high school in South Florida. Robbie Washington, who's in his second year as a Hurricane. Now he made headlines this week, Brian, because he made it official. He talked about this on his social media. Robbie Washington, who came to Miami as a wide receiver, has switched to defensive back. Mario Cristobal and Lance Guidry both spoke very highly of how Robbie projects as a DB. I think there's a lot of internal confidence that may end up being his best position. Is that something you maybe had forecasted from Robbie when he was still in high school? And how do you think the transition from wide receiver to full-time defensive back could go for him?
I don't think it matters which side of the ball he plays on in terms of his athleticism. He's always been very twitchy. Change of direction speed for a corner or a slot corner is paramount. Robbie got, I would say, top 10% in the country coming out of high school, just with that, being conservatively for the elite recruits. And he won't have any transition problems. Now, how does he pick up the scheme and that stuff? That's the only thing, like with
Yeah.
any kid. So I don't know if they're going to play him inside, outside, or how they're going to do it, but he has the speed to run with anybody. Anybody that's seen him on the field knows that. And I saw him in a couple of games in high school playing for Palmetto. I like Robbie as a player. Now he's just got to find that fit because they got so many receivers. He just kind of lost on the depth chart. I think this is an interesting move because they have less depth in the secondary. So I'm anxious to see what he does, man. He's got speed. Now it's just learning the technique.
Absolutely. Well, we have a lot more still to talk about on this episode of Locked On Canes. We got the recruiting overlord with us. I want to identify, maybe there's a consensus, maybe there won't be, as to who the toughest Miami Hurricanes opponent is going to be the rest of the way. And are there teams that we're sleeping on? It's been a weird start to the ACC. Some of the teams you thought would be really good in the conference do not look that way. Others you're starting to take notice of. My friends, you want to keep it locked right here. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Guys, we've been having so much fun. Football season is back. FanDuel. FanDuel is the spot. We got through the summer with Olympics, NBA Finals, Stanley Cup Finals, but now we've got college football and the NFL both back. I basically live on the FanDuel app, and it's a great way to go. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel here on the Locked On Network. It's America's #1 sports book. Well, we have something a little different for you. Right now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and then you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. Make sure for your next listen, you check out Locked On ACC. I co-host that show with Kent and Gibbs. And then on Thursday, we got the squad coming out. Brian Smith is going to be part of that squad. Jackson Holzer from Locked On Syracuse, who I really enjoy, and several others will be part of that squad with us coming up later this week on Locked On ACC. Much like this show, it's available free wherever you get your podcasts, and it's available free on YouTube. All right, so Brian, prior to the season beginning, I would have said the toughest 3 games on Miami's schedule would have been home against Florida State, on the road against Louisville, on the road against Florida. Miami has already, won the first of those. I definitely don't, no disrespect to the game, because I'm not saying beating Florida State will be easy. It's usually not easy. I no longer think that's the toughest game remaining on the schedule. I think it's probably Louisville, Brian. But then I'm not sleeping on Cal on the road after seeing what they just did to Auburn on the road. So who's the toughest game left for the Hurricanes?
I think it's 2 games. Louisville, for me, is the top of the board because I respect Brom as a play caller, a game preparer, and he's got a quarterback with a lot of talent. Tyler Shuck is a guy that's been banged up. He was at Oregon, etc. He's from the state of Arizona. Big guy, 6'4", 6'5", 225. Fits what Brom does. That game is on the road. It's the week before Florida State. It's not a good combination. There's no way around it. Miami's in a tough spot there. That'll be their toughest game. If you're going to mark down an L for them, that would be the one I would pick first. Your point about Cal is interesting as it relates to me. I saw them play Auburn last week. I was on the field for that game. Their quarterback, who's from Miami, Fernando Mendoza, is a guy that played at Columbus, the same high school that 2 people at the University of Miami know well. That's Cristobal and Mirabal. He started the game against Auburn 20 of 22. And 20 of 22. Auburn fans were just flummoxed over it. And everybody on the side was like, this is insane, because Auburn secondary is legit and they got smoked. So it's just pure accuracy. He was throwing the football like an Aaron Rodgers, just putting the ball exactly where he wants it. Doesn't have his arm strength, but everywhere he wanted to throw it. He doesn't have dominant receivers at all. And they beat a team with more talent because of his arm. Miami's got to go on the road for that one too. And that's all the way across. It's like 4,000 miles or something. I don't know what it's a long way. I'm very curious to see if they take them seriously, because if they don't, Cal's defense is pretty good. They'll give them some fits. They change their defense around a little bit, what they do in the secondary. Those would be my 2 picks. Ironically, we're not talking about Florida State, and I obviously covered them on Locked On Seminoles, but I don't know if they can beat anybody right now. That team needs to prove they can beat Memphis if we're talking about the Miami Hurricanes.
Right. Well, and then another team on Miami's schedule, last game of the regular season, Miami's got to go to Syracuse, and Syracuse is trending upwards. Like I'm not saying I'm fully buying in, but
Sure.
Kyle McCord has played surprisingly well there. I've always had faith in Arondé Gadsden, who's already putting up big numbers there. He was injured most of last year. He's back catching passes. And it seems like they're already being well coached under Fran Brown. And I know Syracuse for the last couple of years, different coaching regime, but they've tended to start very well and then finish very poorly. So I don't know what they're going to look like by the time Miami sees them, but Miami's got to go to the Dome, and Syracuse looks better than they were last year.
I would agree with that. I'm surprised at how much Kyle McCord has improved, and good for him. I think it's good for not only Kyle McCord and Syracuse, but the ACC, because let's be honest, ACC outside of Miami, oh boy. I mean, the NC State game, etc., leave a lot to be desired. So maybe Syracuse is one of the surprise teams. Maybe they can be up there with Louisville, Cal, maybe. The league is topsy-turvy. It's the most wild thing I've seen with the ACC since I don't even know when. But his passer rating, I think he's like 8-1 on touchdowns, interceptions. It's crazy. I would not have projected that. I don't think even the most fervent Syracuse fan would either. Now the question is, can they slow Miami down? I don't think they got the personnel to do that. That might be a shootout. But at the end of the year, injuries, more projections about who's getting better and all that come into play. So keep that game in mind. I think you're wise to bring it up, Alex.
Yeah, and Kyle McCord so far, he actually leads the FBS in touchdown passes with his 8 touchdowns. Like there's no other quarterback in the country yet has thrown for as many
There
touchdown
you
passes
go.
as Kyle McCord. So that's something. I mean, he's no Cam Ward, but he's having a pretty good start
Yeah.
to the year. Well, we appreciate your. Oh, go ahead if you have any remarks.
Well, I still need to see more of it. That's
Yeah,
just thing. Now he was the hunter. Now he's the hunted. Syracuse is
right.
starting to get some media attention. That is also different. So very important note.
That is true. Brian Smith does an awesome job. Make sure you check him out on X at FBScout_Florida. Make sure you check him out all over the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm happy to talk some recruiting today because, again, people around the country are starting to take notice. Like Miami has recruited well when they've not played well. Now that they're playing well, shine up your loafers, my friends. It's going to be a fun recruiting season coming up. So make sure you guys check Brian out. Make sure you check us out. If you want to subscribe, Locked On Canes, hit that thumbs up button. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. And we will talk to you again tomorrow on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.